Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me here. My name is Brad Gersich. I'm from the law firm DLA Piper. We're everywhere. We're in about 30 countries. I'm from our Silicon Valley office where I've practiced my entire career. That, of course, is the center of the vast majority of venture capital activity. I am fundamentally a business lawyer. I am technically in our corporate and securities group, but I am a business lawyer that helps startups. I help you form yourselves, get financed, manage and grow your business, and as was the case about 3 hours ago with one of my clients, I help you sell your business if that's the liquidity opportunity that you need. So why am I here? I think because Adrian's probably inspired you to get out of academia and go start your own business, make something happen. And so I'm here to kind of talk about some of the decisions you'll have to make along the way that could be helpful in maximizing the value of this idea that's in your head, or potentially ending up in a situation where it doesn't have the same outcome that you had hoped. So the very first decision you're going to make is, what kind of entity am I going to form? And I understand that some of you are not even from the United States, and admittedly, I'm going to have a US bias because I'm a practicing attorney in the state of California and manage businesses throughout this country. And frequently, I visit with folks from other countries who come to me and say, I've got a great idea, I've even started my business, I even have some revenue with my business. So can you get me the venture capital money to come to me, where I am, where I'm comfortable, where my friends and family are? And I just have to want to emphasize, even off the slides here, that's a real challenge. It's very, very rare that a venture capital firm will be cruising for startups outside of their network and where they live. And so frequently I encourage people to think about, if you want to do this, go all in. Look at opportunities to come over, at least bring the key management team. You can have engineers, you can have a development team where you're from. You can build that bridge through the parent-subsidiary type relationships. But venture capitalists and angel investors want to look you in the eye, and they want to meet with you frequently to see how things are really going. And it's very difficult to do from 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles away. But if you're in the United States and you're thinking about what kind of entity do I want to form, again, if you're out in Silicon Valley, you'll hear all the time the S-Corp form is what you want to have. And the reason for that is because that's the one that invites the most investment dollars. It's the one that most investors understand. It provides a layer of liability protection for everybody. But what some folks, especially the angel investors in other parts of the country, are attracted to the notion of an LLC or an S-Corp. And what that allows you to do is, if you're an investor in one of those kinds of entities, it allows you to take the tax losses that are often exist for these early stage companies in the early stages on your own personal income tax returns. Now, that sounds great, but then there's the complexity of what do you do with the equity incentives for your service providers, the employees, the contractors. Does it sound sexy to a 25-year-old kid? Hey, I've got a profits interest in my company, my LLC. What do you think? It just doesn't resonate. But if you tell somebody, I'll give you an option to buy 100,000 shares of my company for a penny a share, they won't even ask sometimes what percentage of the company that is. It just sounds great, and they get fired up. And so I think that there's something about the corporation approach that the younger team members can embrace and understand. They don't get a K-1 partnership return at the end of the year and say, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? Many of them haven't even filed their own tax returns before. So there's a balance there. And again, a lot of folks, especially in other parts of the country, are used to hearing that their aunt or their uncle has this kind of business or that kind of business, and they did it as an LLC, and they recommended, and their lawyers recommended to do an LLC, and you usually have to counsel them, think big picture, think longer term. Where's your money going to come from? Who are the people that you're going to use to build this product and make it successful? The second choice is Delaware versus really the rest of the world. There are uniquenesses about every jurisdiction. You form an entity in a state. Delaware is the most developed in terms of its facilities, its infrastructure. Things happen in an hour. Things always happen consistently. And most investors like Delaware. They know exactly what it means from a directors and officers liability perspective. And so just about everybody I deal with goes to Delaware. There are some downsides, though. For example, in California, the uniqueness of California law allows the common stock, not the preferred stock that investors often get, to have separate votes on certain kinds of things. This balances the power out between the founder class, the employee class, and the investor class, So again, this is the kind of thing that you want to talk about and think about at the early stages. And by the way, feel free to stop me, raise your hand. If you're getting really excited about a legal topic, about risk identification, mitigation, let me know. It's very rare that happens, so I want to jump on it. All right, so let's just talk about equity issues. I mean, fundamentally, equity and ownership of the business is about economics and control. So you're talking about, percentages versus shares. Again, most people who really understand the economics and the control aspects of corporations understand it's really about the ultimate percentage. But when you're communicating things and when you sell stock in a C corporation, it's in the form of shares. And so people are trying to figure out, well, how do I make sure that I have the rough percentage that I want going forward? Obviously, there is the initial number that you give to yourselves, and then there's kind of a set-aside, a stock option pool, for example, that you'll give to your service providers and you'll use up over time. And if you're thinking proactively, thinking long-term, you're thinking, all right, where do I want to be now? What do I think I need for the next stage of development? What do we need to set aside for my investors based on valuations and et cetera? So this is what it's going to look like at the end of the day. And at each stage, you're hopefully going to grow your valuation, so your percentage ownership goes down, but the overall value of that interest goes up. Equity incentives for advisors and service providers. Obviously, the key there is to have a stock option plan or some kind of pool available. Again, one of the simple tricks of the trade is to have a very large number of shares and a very low exercise price. People seem to connect with that, especially in the kind of the rank and file folks. The more sophisticated executives are going to ask to see a cap table and understand what does that really mean for them. Vesting. This is actually something that again, because I do it so often, I forget that folks sometimes make a mistake on this vesting concept. When you have founders who have strong relationships with co-founders, they often come to me and say, we want to have our shares, we don't want to have any vesting, this is our idea, we've already built part of the product, and share alike. And I emphasize that there really is kind of a meritocracy aspect of this that they have to recognize. It's almost like planning for the divorce in a marriage. Yes, it sounds great that you'll always be together and everybody will always work as hard as they're working now, but things change in life. Sometimes not even because somebody decides they lost their work ethic. It's because things change in their lives. And so there's a question about how do you make sure that people's contributions over time match the economics and the control they're given with their shares. So vesting effectively allows a company to buy back a certain portion of those shares if the people do not provide services over a period of time. So if you buy a million shares at a penny a share, if you're a founder, very low price, very low contribution, you may subject 3/4, even all of it, to vesting, which allows the company to buy it back. And again, I emphasize that it's important to think about that. Give your, founders often give themselves a little bit to take home no matter what, but they stretch out over some period of time. And investors want to see that. Investors want to know that you're in it for the long haul, that you're not just going to take their money and then quit on them and expect somebody else to build value in the business. But even among founders, there is that incentive that says, hey, let's hold ourselves accountable for continuing forward for the next 2, 3, 4 years. And if you decide to opt out and go choose something else, that's okay. No hard feelings. But we're taking your stock back, and your relative ownership of the company will go down as a result. Fundraising sources. Adrian talked a little bit about the different stages of development. Obviously, friends and family are frequently the first source for a company to just kind of get off the ground and get a sense of things. The crowd is an increasingly popular way to raise funds. I have a client that used Kickstarter to gather funds for the initial beta model of his helicopter that flies around and uses GoPro to take videos. Raised over $1 million that way. Crowdfunding specifically, trying to sell shares to a broad range of people through broad offerings, is now something that people are talking more and more about. Even the federal government is talking about having a, albeit heavily regulated approach, an opportunity to give the ordinary person a chance to get into some of these tech companies that are generating great returns. I personally am very skeptical that you can really build a business successfully through crowdfunding in the form of selling securities. Everybody who has a 1 share of stock has to be treated like every other stockholder, from an information perspective, from a communication perspective. And often, just the headache of managing all of that communication is just simply not worth the money. So think very carefully about that. As we move into the angels, venture capitalists, and the venture debt, you're often talking about the importance of the relationships, the networks that those people have, and how they can create value for your business going forward. And the random dentist and veterinarian in the Midwest who just wanted to put $5,000 into your business is not going to be able to add value that way. It tends to be, again, just the money. And what the angels and the venture capitalists are offering is not just a one-stop shop for a very large check, but also the network and the opportunity to learn from their experience and get mentoring. And it's a one-on-one personal relationship. You can count on them to potentially be around for the next round. This is what they do. And they also don't panic when things don't go very well. So you've got angels, individuals, and groups. This is an investor class that has grown significantly in the last 3 to 5 years. And I like the groups of angels because it's an opportunity to present in a room like this, 70, 80 people in the place, individually who may make an investment decision. Collectively, they often have funds that will make an investment decision, so you get a larger check at one time. But from an efficiency standpoint, it's a great opportunity to just make one pitch and talk to a lot of people at the same time. Venture capitalists, obviously, a great resource. Many of them are now having the kind of a seed fund, a separate fund just for the early stage investments. They'll throw 500, they'll throw 100, they'll throw $1 million at a deal, not insisting that it be a true Series A round where you write a big check and they get a huge chunk of the company. And then there's venture debt. There are lenders out there that will give you money expecting to get it paid back with a relatively high interest rate, and they'll expect some sort of equity kicker or reward on the side. That often isn't the best resource for the earliest stage. It's often even not available at the early stage, but I've seen some of it. But certainly if you raise, say, $500,000 or $1 million, sometimes you can have a Silicon Valley Bank or some of the other folks that play in this space come in for a small piece and give you a line of credit for $500,000. It just kind of helps round out, give you some extra cushion in your budget. All right, let's talk about the securities that you're issuing at the earliest stages. Obviously, founders are getting common stock, which is what everybody kind of understands. It's a simple ownership interest in the company. Preferred stock is often what the seed investors are increasingly asking for. It gives them some special provisions, for example, what's called a liquidation preference. If you decide to shut down the business and you sell off the assets and you got $100,000 left, well, all that money is going to go to the investor that gave you $100,000 before you see a nickel. Again, it will give them some special rights, and there's a reason that, and in exchange for those special rights, they'll pay a slightly higher price than the folks that are buying common stock. Convertible debt is a neat feature. It's been around for quite a while. It allows you to take in money without really setting a valuation. The notion is this: you give me $100,000, and I promise to pay it to you in 15 months. Everybody knows that you're going to burn through $100,000 in 15 months. They're really not expecting to get paid back. But inside the document it says that $100,000 will convert into the next round of equity financing, but at a lower price than the new cash investors will pay at that financing. So it's 15, 20, 25% discount. It's a way of enabling an angel investor with a small check to give you just a little boost, just to get off the ground. Because that angel investor may not have an opportunity to see this deal if they wait around for the true Series A round to happen and a $3 million check needs to be written. The angel investor can't write that check. And when the venture capitalist comes in and says, here's your $3 million check, and I don't care who else might want to be in this, I'm the only one who wants to be here. We don't want distractions. So the angel investor can get into a deal that they otherwise wouldn't see. They get a better deal than the venture capitalist will get because they'll pay a discount off of what the venture capitalist will pay when the Series A round happens. And the founder gets some money now as opposed to later, and doesn't have to really price the securities, doesn't have to deal with the extra cost that's associated with doing a full equity round. So convertible debt is a relatively cheap and relatively quick way to raise money, get somebody eventually into the mix to get on your cap table at some point in time in the future. Now, in the last 2 or 3 years, there's also been something called the Simple Agreement for Future Equity. And the only difference between that and convertible debt is that there's absolutely no obligation to ever pay the money back. So there isn't such a thing as a maturity date in 15 months, like I gave in my example for convertible debt. So people like this idea. It basically just says, look, you'll get preferred someday or you'll get common someday, but you'll always end up with equity. So that just gives the founder some sense that they aren't going to have an investor who gets unhappy, wait it out, and in 15 months try to shut down the company and sell off the assets and collect the debt. And we already talked about loans with warrant kickers through the venture debt example. All right, so now you've got a little bit of seed money. You've got an entity formed. You've got some stock options in the hands of your team. And so you're trying to figure out, how do I really manage some of these relationships of the people who are helping me build out the product to get to the next level so I can go out and look for a real, true Series A round. So you've got contractors and employees, the two types of relationships that you can establish with people who are service providers. And increasingly, people want to have everyone be an independent contractor because it means you don't have to deal with tax withholding. You can often hand the person a check, let them take the entire value home and say, I don't want to know what happens with your taxes, you deal with it. There's just a lot less hassle associated with having an independent contractor. The problem is you cannot really legally treat everyone as an independent contractor. If you have 5 people in a room, all using company computers, all acting under the guidance of one manager, that's called an employment relationship. You can call it an independent contractor relationship, but it isn't. And the IRS recognizes that that's not an independent contractor relationship. So again, I think a lot of startups are relatively aggressive about classifications, but I think with some proper support and guidance on the various aspects and the differences between employees versus independent contractors, you can increase the likelihood that the IRS and others will respect your classification, whatever you choose it to be. So I've seen lots of folks who say, look, I've got engineers in 3 or 4 different countries. They use their own equipment. I just tell them, go build this component, and I have my true employees. I have 2 actual employees that gather all this stuff up, integrate it into something that is my product. You can make it work, but you have to manage it thoughtfully. What are the consequences of potential misclassification? Obviously, you're not doing withholding on the payments. That could be your responsibility. You could have other folks coming back and saying, hey, you treated me as an independent contractor, but there were benefits that were given to employees. I truly was an employee, and therefore I want those same benefits. And now you've kind of got a backlog of problems. Minimum wage laws, even with employees, people think, hey, I'll just hire them as employees and give them equity. Well, if you're treating them like an employee and they are an employee, they're entitled to minimum wage just like the farm workers, picking strawberries. So people think that just because it's tech, it's entitled to this own little world of laws, and it's not. So keep that in mind as well. What are the tools of recruitment? You've got a variety of different kinds of equity incentives, traditional stock options, restricted stock, where people buy the stock up front. Increasingly now, I am talking to founders at an earlier stage about an RSU, a restricted stock unit. Traditionally, that was limited only to public companies. But now there's kind of an innovation, in large part driven by what Facebook did back when it was a private company, giving people shares that don't have an exercise price. And what it basically says is, if you stay a certain period of time, and if we have a liquidity event within a certain period of time, we will just release the shares to you. And the key to that is the release of those shares has to be at a time when they can actually pay the taxes for the value of the shares they received. So again, the difference between, for example, a stock option where you have a right to buy stock in the future at a fixed price. Someone may say, well, I'm really not excited about buying 100,000 shares at $1 a share. We have to grow this company significantly in order for me to really see value in that. If I say to you, I'll give you 100,000 shares, there's no exercise price at all. All you have to do is stay here for 4 years, and we've got to sell the company within 7 years and look at our business plan. You'll get all of them for free. Now I'm interested. Now I don't have to worry about the value that's been built in that equity to date and the fair market value exercise price. Tools of recruitment, again, just practically, culture, responsibility, and title. You're often bringing a lot of people with a lot of talent, but don't have a lot of experience. And so I find that just the sheer opportunity to be a director level or even a VP level if necessary and have a real impact on the product is incredibly exciting. And you can find folks for $40,000, $50,000 even in high, very expensive markets like my own who are willing to work for pizza and a title and some equity. So, and that sense of culture, and I emphasize how important that is, especially for the teams of young talent that you're building. And also, again, for folks that are outside of the US, that's one of the biggest challenges I hear from founders is that their home environments simply don't have that kind of ecosystem, that culture of innovation, that culture of risk-taking, the culture of I'm willing to work for cheap and work for equity and see what happens. And so, building your business in a place where there are enough people who think like that is really important. One big risk here that I've seen folks make the mistakes with is telling people, look, I don't have the money right now, but I'll give you an offer letter that says you're making $80,000. I'll just pay you when we get financed. Sounds great, but you're actually accruing that liability. And so you can set it up so you can have, there'll be a bonus if there's a financing event, there's other kinds of things. But if you're actually accruing at that $100,000 rate, that $80,000 rate, when the financing comes, now the investor's staring at this balance sheet that says, you've got to pay all of this back. And there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, those are vested wages. If I'm the employee, there's no way I'm walking away from that. So I've had some really, really difficult Series B financings where someone came to me after the fact and said, hey, we want you to use you for a financing. Here's some of the things we have to disclose to the investor. And they've got, $1.5 million of deferred wages. So again, there's ways to structure it, pay people a very low salary, say this is how we're accruing, and maybe we'll have a bonus at a financing, maybe we'll do this, maybe we'll do that, we'll have other kind of contingencies, but you simply cannot lock in that rate. Some other aspects of smart talent management. So people often are recruiting from other places where people have developed experience, often have specific substantive knowledge that you want to bring to your business. In many parts of the country, it is permissible to have restrictive covenants, including things like non-competes. So it's very important to ask where the people that you're trying to hire, in what way might you be restricted in doing what I want you to do for my company? Let me see your exit documents. Let me see the documents that you've signed for your current employer so I know what I'm getting myself into. Very important to tell people when they come on, look, I'm looking for your general knowledge and expertise. Leave everything behind. Don't download things and expect to build out what I want you to build for me based on what you already built for somebody else and what they paid you to build. I simply do not want to taint my intellectual property with a mess with your former employer. Very important to have people sign at the very beginning of the process when they get employed that everything they do will be confidential and that they assign the ownership rights of what they create to the company. Again, just sold a company last week where the company was very sloppy about collecting these kinds of things, and it was a closing condition to go out to people that no longer worked for the company and ask them to clarify in writing that they were assigning their intellectual property into the company. We had to pay them separately in order to do that after the fact. So, again, founder creates a lot of value, very exciting event for him at the exit, realizes the sloppiness along the way could really jeopardize that exit opportunity. Again, it's not just employees, but it's also consultants. Everybody who's working for you needs to sign a document that makes it clear that they don't have any independent rights to what you're building. And then again, on the employment side, make sure that your offer letters have clear at-will language. In California, we have a statute that says all employees, as a matter of default, are at will. It's a completely worthless statute as a matter of practice. Because when you go into court and you're dealing with 12 ordinary folks, they're not looking at statutes. They have the natural sense of entitlement to continued employment. And unless you beat them over the head with it in the offer letter that says you're at will, you can walk, we can walk at any time, no obligations, there's got to be risk and there's got to be problems. That's the first thing I ask when a CEO calls me and says, hey, we want to process somebody out. I said, let's look at the offer letter. Okay? So again, handshake deals, quick off the cuff, here's your offer, that kind of stuff can really hurt you down the road. Briefly, outsourcing. Again, the notion is that often you have a core team that really understands what you're trying to build, but you're trying to reach out to Belarus or China or India or somewhere else where there's a lower cost resource to help generate some of this intellectual property. Very important, again, that the intellectual property ownership be established in writing and that you have a clear understanding of exactly how those relationships are established. Are they directly with the individual engineers? Is it with a company that is hiring the engineers? Does that company have clear written agreements with the people that it's working with? So you got to kind of follow the bouncing ball in that intellectual property. I just cannot emphasize how important the intellectual property ownership aspect and the documentation of it is in these situations. There is some tax planning aspects of this as well. It's not just a matter of hiring folks outside the US. You frequently want to understand exactly how that flow of funds is going and whether or not there's some sort of deemed income for one entity or the other. Are you establishing subsidiary relationships? Are you establishing independent contractor relationships with this entity that's not under your control? Those kinds of things. And then, of course, equity incentives. That can be something that is increasingly interesting to people in those non-US markets who hear about all these kinds of opportunities. Yes, they are willing to work for an awful lot less than an engineer in the United States is willing to work for, but they also want to have a little bit of the upside. And that requires a little bit of complexity. Not every jurisdiction is ready for equity incentives like the US is. And so you have to kind of navigate that carefully. Again, I'm not an intellectual property expert, but just big picture. Looking at patents, looking at trademarks, important to do on the front end. Plenty of my clients are deciding not to go down the patent path, thinking that if they just get out in front of this quickly enough, be first to market, that patent protection is not as critical, in part because of the expense of patents. Frequently, though, you can do what's called a provisional, which is a much more expensive way to kind of plant the flag and hold the line for a year, while you are running around trying to get some market traction, which will then get you the opportunity to get a very large Series A or Series B round from an investor to then pay for the kind of full protection that you might get from patents. Patents have an offensive and a defensive aspect to them. But fundamentally, the nice thing about having them is that you know you're in a great position. The last thing you want to do is have somebody who has bet on patents decide to pick on you and go after you in a litigation context. Because once you're in it, you lose. Even if you win the case, you're going to lose. It's very, very expensive. Trademarks, not as critical. You can kind of move things around a little bit. If someone says, hey, I don't like the fact that you're using that name, we've used that name for our product for a long time, you think you got to change it. It's not the end of the world. But again, think about the branding. You're spending 6, 12 months, a lot of investment, URLs, websites, marketing materials, you're going to conferences, you're building brand and a name. If you haven't just looked at who might have some sort of claim on that name, then and switch it around, it's just a pain. Other key commercialization issues. So if you are partnering with another company, again, it's very critical to look at that documentation, establish who has what, who owns what, and who has a right to use what, and in what capacity. Indemnities and performance warranties, often founders and early stage startups get very aggressive about this, assuring their customers that it'll work and whatever goes wrong, no matter what happens, we'll pay for it. You can get too aggressive in that kind of situation and really expose your company, and you simply won't have the resources to back those up. Exclusivity rights, again, this is another thing that desperate companies often do, is to say, I'm really excited about the revenue opportunity here. I'll give you an exclusive access, whether it's to a market, to a geography, to a certain use. That can really compromise the value of a business, not only for investors, but also for people who might want to buy you down the road. And oftentimes these exclusive relationships come with a strategic partner or a customer who says, I will give you a lot of revenue, but I want the right to buy you if this thing really is become successful effectively. What they're saying is, if you get an offer from somebody else, you got to come to me and let me match it. That can be really discouraging to the competitive tension that you want to build to create high value in your exits. Because if I come in as somebody who has been interested in what you've been doing, and then I find out that one of my competitors, who is one of your customers, has the right to match whatever I'm going to do, well, why should I invest in the time? I know how this is going to end. All right, so we've talked about some of these pitfalls, little mistakes along the way, some of the issues that pop up. Who can help me navigate all this? I think, frankly, folks like Adrian who are here are fantastic resources because they're relatively unbiased. They can tell you, they've seen it all before, and they'll help you navigate some of these issues. There's a community of fellow founders, whether it's websites and meetup events, these kinds of things. I'm sure at lunch you'll be talking about these types of issues, shared experiences, and how you've dealt with problems and anticipated problems. Advisors can be very helpful, often for a very small equity kicker. You can get somebody who has real industry experience, to show up every month or two to kind of sit down with you for an hour or two and really dig into some of these things. It's amazing how efficient folks with experience can be in guiding you to go on the right path and avoid some of these problems. And obviously lawyers. That's the kind of the end of the speech, which is you know, people like myself can help you navigate some of these kinds of issues as they come up. A lot of folks are a little bit intimidated by lawyers because we do generally charge on a time and materials basis. But for startups, folks like our firm tend to find creative ways to make it a little less difficult to talk to us on the front end. We'll have a certain bucket of funds that we'll say, all right, you know what, we'll just defer that. You can use this up and we'll just set it aside. If you ever get financed by a meaningful amount, well, then you pay us then. If it doesn't work out, you won't pay us. It's okay. It's part of our portfolio approach and being part of the ecosystem. So I wanted to leave some time for questions to ask about these issues or any issues that are on your mind about your business. Free legal advice. Grab it. Take it.